Okay, so we're officially starting now, and I would like to welcome everyone from the UK, the US, around the world. As we mentioned in the first of this series, so this is the second of a three-part series of career conversations that we're having, and they all are focused around confidence. But this talk today is specifically going into depth on mentoring. And next week, next Friday, same time, except actually an hour earlier for those of you in the UK because of the time change. Actually, no, I'm sorry, an hour. It's an hour difference because of daylight savings in the US. But we will be talking and focusing just on salary negotiation because those are two bigger topics on careers that really affect confidence. So I just want to thank you for being here today on our talk about mentoring. And at the moment, I believe everyone is unmuted, and that's fine. I would just ask that if you have some interruption in the background, everyone's been muted upon entry, but feel free to unmute yourself if you are in a quiet place. And the reason we started this series, or we were inspired, partly because of International Women's Day, and that was yesterday, and I had a great day. There were a lot of events at the World Bank that were celebrating, and I know I saw a lot of celebration around the world. So that's what inspired us. But also with a lot of our clients, Ruth and I often see a lack of confidence as one of the issues that people, specifically women, face when it comes to career management and job search and career issues. So that's what inspired us. And now we're trying to be courageous ourselves, and thought we'd try something different and new. Just as a quick aside, Ruth and I met 2010 at a Career Thought Leaders Conference, and it just goes to show how networking, you never know where it will take you, because we met once and we live across the pond from each other, so we don't see each other often, except at that conference once a year, but that was enough to bring us together and try to collaborate. And I have a feeling we'll do more of it now that we've had this experience. So I'll give a quick intro of myself, and then I'll give Ruth a moment to give a quick bio for herself, and then we will jump into the content. So my background includes human resources, training, workforce development, and career advising. I've helped thousands of individuals on their career journey. And I'm so excited to be here today because as I've worked in this field over the past 15, 20 years, I've come to realize that my favorite group of people to work with is mid-career women, mid-career to executive women. And by my definition, that means someone who's worked for 20 years at some point in their life. And so I'm really excited to focus on that population moving forward. And this is one step in that direction. For official credentials, feel free to go to paulabrand.com because that has my education, certification, things like that. And then just on a personal note, I'd like to share that I love to travel. In fact, I've been to 25 countries and 5 continents, and I'm happy to say someone on the call today is someone I met during my travels in January. So I think that's fun. And I like to learn, I like to teach, I like to connect others, and I love to eat ice cream. So that's all about me. I think I didn't get to say that last time because that's when the storm hit. So now I'll turn it over to Ruth to give a quick bio for herself.
Yeah, I do like ice cream too, I admit. But my favorite is probably chocolate and Swiss chocolate. I've been in the careers field for 24 years, and it really feels like I entered it yesterday. And it's a very exciting place to be because it's changing so fast, and new challenges. I saw Steve Jobs' original job application from 1976 on the internet yesterday. And you wouldn't believe how simple it was, and how many spelling errors he had in there. And when you look at how much of us is demanded these days in terms of, managing our careers, positioning ourselves online, on paper, in person, there's a lot to do. But I absolutely love my field, and mentoring for me has been a real game changer. When I came into the industry as a total newbie, all those years ago, I had quite a lot of people who took me under their wings and showed me the profession, and that was informal, and what that means we'll speak about in a minute, but also a few more informal arrangements where I had mentors. And as it then happens, before you know it, you have a lot of experience, and then you feel you want to give something back to people, and you become a mentor yourself. And I've just been mentoring as part of my professional association. I had 2 mentees over the last 6 months, and it just reminded me what a fantastic tool it is, not only for the mentees, so the people you help along the way to learn and grow, but also for us as mentors, how rewarding it is and how much we learn from our mentees. So mentoring is our topic today. And
yep.
Paula, do you just want to do a few housekeeping, or how have we done the housekeeping?
I'll just say very quickly, just to repeat, that if you want to stay muted, feel free to stay muted. And if you're not in a quiet area, please keep yourself muted. But we do want it to be a conversation, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions at any point, and share input or insights or resources. And then, of course, use the chat box. And if you can write to everyone, that is helpful. Honestly, we're trying a new thing today where Ruth is co-hosting. So if you write to the host, it's possible we do both see it. But so I would say write to the host if you're concerned about privacy. Otherwise, just chat to everyone, and that will help facilitate the conversation. I think that's all we've got for housekeeping. And we've got everyone off of video just to make it a faster time frame. You know what I mean? Faster service. It slows down things when everyone's on video. So that's the housekeeping. And I'll just say that mentoring, of course, does come up a lot when talking about building confidence. And of course, that's why we're tying it to this series. And specifically, as we've mentioned before, among women, I've seen how mentoring can help people. I've seen it in many different ways through programs. And I think that it helps. We're going to talk about some of this in more detail, but just to briefly say at the front end, I think mentoring can help with the many different generations that are in the workforce as a way to close some of those gaps. Ruth and I have talked about how the mentoring foundational principles are actually a little different between the US and the UK. And so that will probably come up during our conversation. But ultimately, mentoring can really give someone the boost they need to realize that they can go further than they thought. And so that's what we'd like to delve into more today. So I will start by asking Ruth to give us a little bit of a broader, I want the slide change. I'm trying to get it, there we go. So these are the 5 key points that we've got for our discussion today. And I'm going to start by asking Ruth to share a little bit more about what is mentoring and how does it work. And I realize we have a lot of colleagues on the call, as well as people who are not in the career profession. So for those of you who are fellow colleagues, career colleagues, please feel free to share your insights and bear with us as we just talk a little bit about mentoring basics so that we don't presume everyone knows what we all know. If we're in the career field, we do know a lot about mentoring. Although, as we were preparing for this call, we taught each other some new things too. So with that, let me turn it over to Ruth to talk about just some basic definitions. We'll start with this one right here.
Okay, so mentoring, I would call is a developmental partnership. So developmental in the sense of helping someone learn and grow. And the other important word for me is partnership. So there's, although, traditionally you can argue a mentor is, the more senior person, the more experienced person, and the mentee, the person who's learning from that person, there is that imbalance of power. But actually, I think the best mentoring is when people treat each other as equals, because both parties can actually learn from each other. So it's a partnership to help you learn and grow. And the aim is to provide offline help from one person to another in making significant transitions in knowledge, work, or thinking. And that definition comes from David Clutterbuck, who is really the mentoring guru here in the UK. And that definition is almost 20 years old. And you can tell, for me, there's something missing. I totally get the transition in knowledge, work, and thinking. But there's also, for me, the emotional intelligence part. A lot of the mentoring that I'm involved in is when you see where people start and where they end, there's a massive shift in terms of, how they perceive things, their mindset, how they view things, a lot of emotional growth. And I think back in the, 20 years ago, that wasn't really so much on the agenda. So I would add that in. The interesting thing that Paul and I discussed was, in the UK, we have a very strong tradition of developmental mentoring. So that means that the focus is on the the mentee to learn and grow. Whereas in the US, as I understand it, and all the research I did in the US and reading US publications, it's traditionally much more about taking someone under your wing and pushing them upwards. So opening your Rolodex, making connections happen, so to accelerate someone's career. And Paul and I were discussing that actually means in the US that it can be seen as a little bit more elitist. You pick the talent that deserves to be pushed upwards. And in the UK, that is certainly not the tradition. In the UK, it's very much a professional development method that is fantastic for everyone. From, we do it in schools, we do it in universities, we do it with graduates, but you also do it at very, very senior level. But I think, Paula, you were saying that is also changing a little bit in the US to make it more equal and not just for the top talent. Is that correct?
I do see that trend. And again, feel free to chime in, those of you who are in the career field, if you see that as well. But certainly I think it started more as sort of a benefit for certain groups who are trying to be like high potential groups in certain organizations. But I do think it's becoming more widespread now, more egalitarian, so to speak, and not just for people of specific career paths or in certain categories.
Great. And I mean, and I don't assume that we all know what mentoring is. So very briefly, what we mean by that is it's that partnership between traditionally a more experienced professional, who we call a mentor, and a less experienced professional who we'll call the mentee. And the aim is to give the mentee a confidential space, a trusted space where they can learn and explore and grow. And it's for them to set themselves new challenges and achieve very specific outcomes. And the role of the mentor is a sounding board, helping the mentee find their own solutions, like a trusted guide, a wise counsel, and also to provide challenge and support, but never telling the mentee what to do. So it's not consulting. So we're not going into mentoring relationship to ask the mentor, okay, tell me what to do. Maybe we'll say, what is your advice? But ideally, the mentor will always help the mentee find their own solutions. And it's different from coaching also in that respect, that a mentor acts as a mentor because of their experience in a certain area. So they do bring their own experience into the conversation, rather than when in coaching, where the experience of the coach is not relevant or actually seen in the traditional coaching thought. You don't bring your life experience into the coaching. And so that's, and briefly, mentoring can be formal. And formal would be, often, an organization has a scheme. You make a formal agreement. Someone is matching a mentor and a mentee, and it's part of an organizational development program. And it can be, often 3 to 6 months, 12 months. The longest I've ever mentored anyone was 3.5 years. But that is very unusual. And it is really meant to achieve real transformation. And informal is much more about, it could be an ad hoc coffee meeting, it could be a couple of times, it could be once. It's having conversations about a certain aspect of your professional development, but it's not an official arrangement. And, I personally strongly believe I've done both, and both formal and informal can be really productive. But I do think in terms of expectations, and the formality of it and organizational support, it's very different. I mean, Paula, you've done several things in the mentoring schemes too, haven't you?
I have, although as we talked about when we were preparing for this, I haven't really had any formal mentoring experiences. So I've implemented mentoring programs and seen the results. And I've definitely been asked to give informational interviews by many people who are trying to get into our field. And I have a lot of nieces and nephews who are in their 20s. And so I would say most of my personal experience with mentoring has been implementing it as part of HR or or informal setting. So in that way, it's a little different for us. One thing I do want to mention too, before we go to the next question though, Ruth, is the offline, because honestly, when I first read your definition, I thought you meant meaning not online, like not through Skype or,
good point.
So talk just a little bit about what you mean by offline.
Yeah. So offline is, and that David Clutterbuck's message and language means basically it's not in a line management relationship. And I think that is absolutely crucial, because sometimes people just say, oh, get your boss to mentor you. And I totally disagree with that, because as a boss, I have certain expectations of my employee, and it's a conflict of interest. So offline means not your boss, not your line manager, because you need to find someone who's independent so that you can discuss in that mentoring relationship whatever is important to you. It could be that you decide, you know what, it's not the right place for me to be anymore, I need to leave. Well, you could never say that to your boss. Your boss will have his or her own ideas about your professional development. And the wonderful thing about mentoring is you take that out of that relationship and you find someone to help you grow and learn based on what you think you need to learn and do to grow, not someone else's ideas. So offline, strictly speaking, not line management, not your boss. And I do see this breached quite regularly, and I just think it's the wrong approach. So thank you for picking up on that, Paula. I forgot that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Does anyone else want to chime in, either unmute yourself or put something in the chat box to share any other aspects of mentoring that we didn't touch upon, on how it works or definitions?
Hi, Paula, Ruth, this is Sabira. How are you?
Hi, Sabira. I'm good. How are you?
Hi. I just wanted to chime in real quick. I know
sure.
like 3 of the last universities that I worked at, we developed mentoring programs for students, alumni and students. So I think that is pretty popular within the, in the US. And there were a number of different mentoring, one on the career side, but also one of the more interesting partnerships that we ended up doing was more about how do you be effective, as a first-year student with that alumni-student relationship. So that was interesting. And, there was a platform to connect the two, the alumni and the student together. But with the advent of LinkedIn, I think some of these platforms are, all being reviewed as to, do we need a separate platform or not? And I hear that's the conversations currently within at least the university systems.
Thanks, Sabira. Yeah, I do think you do see it a lot in universities. It's been a while since I've been part of a university as a student, but I do think that's a pretty commonplace. And Ruth, you mentioned that too in the UK.
Yeah.
Do they do it even in high schools in the UK?
Yes, to be honest, they even do it at primary school. In my children's primary schools, they had reading mentors, so maybe, just students who were 3 or 4 years older loved reading, and they would go in and mentor the little ones to start reading. But I was involved in one of the top universities in the UK in setting up a mentoring scheme, and it's been immensely popular. And interestingly enough, the support was very clearly coming from the top. So we had a lot of head of departments, very, very busy academics coming in to act as mentors because they were just so dedicated to it. And they all said, look, without mentoring, I wouldn't be where I am. So I want to give something back. And that is, I think, one of the wonderful things about mentoring. Okay, so thank you for that.
Thanks, Sabira. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a good point, that some people are intimidated to ask someone to be their mentor, but it does seem that most people who have received mentoring want to pay it forward or pay it backwards, so to speak. So very good.
We'll talk about that when it comes to how do you find a mentor, because that's something we need to bear in mind. Paula, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what one should look for in a mentor, because you and I, we are very strategic about picking our mentors. So what should one do?
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that, because that is important. And I do think you do need to be strategic. It's just like networking. You don't want to just go to every event and meet people. I mean, that's good, but it's much better if you go to specific events where the people you want to meet will be. So it's the same concept with mentoring. It's not just about someone you like or someone you get along with or someone who's senior than you. You really want to think about what is it you want to learn and who has the appropriate professional background, experience, skill sets, knowledge, industry, that you want to tap into. And so I think you have to start there. What is it you feel like you want to develop and where do you want to grow? And then once you answer that question for yourself, then start to look at, well, who are the experts in that field, or who are the top subject matter experts in that industry, and then go from there. I think it's especially important if you're trying to change industries or change careers, that you find a mentor who is in the new target role, not a current role. I think that's very important as you are moving towards that. And likely that person can help you get some inroads and introduce you to some people, and maybe suggest professional associations and events that you might want to go to, and conferences. So I think that's really critical if you're changing careers. Also think about how much you want to stretch yourself. So the more different your mentor is in terms of personality or ways of working or their background, the greater the challenge might be, but also the potential for greater results can also be there as well. So think about how much, how much you want to challenge yourself, I guess. And also think about how much time you have to commit to it. So, and how much, what you expect from the person you're asking. So when you pick someone, if you pick someone who's super busy, and you can just tell that their life must be crazy busy, maybe that's not the best person to ask initially. Maybe, especially if you know that there's a lot of things going on in their life. So that's another way of being strategic. Or location. If you pick someone who's in a different time zone, that might be challenged to set up meeting times. Or if you pick someone who is local in your same town, it might be easier to meet for coffee and things like that. So those are just some of the strategic areas, and feel free to chime in as anyone wants to about other ways you could be strategic. I'll just make one last point before I stop on this topic, which is the biggest mistake we see in mentoring is choosing a mentor who's just like you. Someone you think you get on well and you'll get good results, but often you can learn more working with someone who has a different style or a different personality or a different perspective. So if you're up for it, that can be a good part of your strategy to purposely not pick someone who's just like you.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Does anyone?
I think the tendency is to go for what we're comfortable with, and that is fine. But if you really want to be stretched and move forward, and I think there's a lot to be said for choosing someone who is different from you. What about you guys? I mean, any experiences you want to share? If you've been mentoring or been a mentee, how did you choose your mentor?
Yeah, share with us if you had a specific strategy, or maybe you wished you had a strategy when you had a mentor in the past.
And you can always unmute yourselves.
No pressure. We'd love to hear from any of you, but no pressure if you were munching away your lunch or something like that. You want to go on, Ruth? No one seems to be chiming in.
Yeah. We want to talk a little bit about how do you find your ideal mentor? And Paula, if you can go back to the slide before, then we can just see the different
Sure.
points.
And you know what, actually, Ruth, before we do that, I do want to add one thing. So there was someone who signed up for the call and sent a question in ahead, and they were just asking for, this kind of goes to the strategy. They were asking for what ways can you create real professional development opportunities for women to learn specific needed skill sets like budgeting, reporting, project planning. And I think that question goes directly to what I had just said in terms of being strategic. So if you need a specific skill, you realize that to get into this next role, you have to have X skill, and you know that you don't have a lot of experience with that skill, I think that it would behoove you to find a mentor who is expert in that skill, or at least more advanced than you are. So I just wanted to address Stacy's question. So, and let's move on to how to find an ideal mentor. And I think I switched the slides back. So what do you think, Ruth? What would your advice be on how to find an ideal mentor?
Yeah, so definitely ensure it's not your line manager. I seem to have a real thing about that. Because I do think it makes it very difficult and potentially a real conflict of interest. Because your boss will have their own ideas of your professional development goals, and so ideally go to someone who is not your boss. And these days, I would do it very differently from what I did 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, I strictly went by, okay, what do I want to learn? How do I need to grow? And who's got what I need? Who can help me? So I basically started with my networks, or I identified people that way, or asked for advice. If I didn't know someone, but I would ask someone I trust and say, hey, I'm looking for someone who could help me with this. Who do you know? Who do you recommend? And that is a good way to do it, through recommendation. You can do it in your organization. Absolutely no reason why you shouldn't, in your field or in your industry. And as we said, also outside of your industry if you want to change field. So the personal recommendation, I think, goes a long way. One way that I really love is going through professional associations. So many professional associations have their own mentoring schemes, often formal ones. So you can go to the organization and say, look, I'm looking for a mentor. Have you got a mentoring scheme? And I would like to get onto the list. And they will then send you a questionnaire asking you what you're looking for, what your situation is. It's obviously all strictly confidential. And they will then match you with a mentor who has the right background and experience for you. And I think that is a really good way to do it. So going for a formal mentoring scheme from the associations. And then obviously, let's not forget, these days we've got the internet. And so I would be very tempted to look at places like LinkedIn and look at, in the groups or in the updates in your networks, look for someone who looks really interesting and follow what they share, what they write. And I think there's not, introduce yourself, and maybe you don't say the first, as soon as you introduce yourself, and by the way, do you want to be my mentor? But it's about building that relationship. And once you've got that relationship, I just think it's very flattering to be asked to be a mentor. So if you can make a good case and say, look, I know you're really an expert in this area, and that's exactly what I really would love to learn, and this is my background, and this is what I would like to grow in. Would you be prepared to give me some mentoring support? And yes, some people might say, look, this is not good a time, or I'm too busy, or not at the moment. But do not think that you're expecting too much, or you should not ask because you burden them. Okay, it's a time commitment, but I know for sure that really good people, they often got to where they are because of mentoring, and they often are keen to give something back, and because they know that they learn so much from the process themselves. So it's not doing you a favor, it's also, there's a real benefit to themselves, because it's so rewarding. So I would say, yes, networks, professional associations, looking at who offers these formal mentoring schemes, but also be proactive. You could be reading articles in the press or in our career publications, or in Forbes or Harvard Business Review, whatever, and say, wow, that's really a person I really admire, or I want to learn from, and make a business case for it and see what they say. The worst they can do is say no. And then you ask, okay, if it's not a good moment now, would you do it in the future? You have to be a little bit cheeky, but if you do it with a good business case behind it, then I think it's flattering to be asked, to be honest.
Right. Ruth, I would also ask that a lot of people who have mentored in the past realize that they get something out of it as well. So,
yeah.
Don't just
Absolutely.
think that, oh, they're doing you this huge favor and they don't get anything in return. They do. There's in different ways, besides flattery, right? There often are things that the mentee can give back. Maybe it's expertise on cooking or gardening or something totally unrelated to careers, or something related to careers like technology. But that can be a real, it's usually a mutually beneficial relationship. So don't feel like, oh, woe is me, this person's going to say no, and just set yourself up for rejection before you even ask. As Ruth said, the worst that someone can say is no. And I think that's true in salary negotiation, in asking for career advice, in so many things.
I mean, Valerie is raising a really good point in the chat, and that is, the issue of trust. And I couldn't agree more. Valerie says, the issue of trust is important. You need to feel that your mentor will protect your confidence, especially as you may be sharing your doubts about your current role or your capacity to solve problems. Absolutely. And so finding that person you can trust. And yes, it is confidential. I mean, even if it's informal mentoring, you can agree, or I think you should agree at the beginning, this is confidential. This is just between you and me, because otherwise you can't really open up and share what really is going on. And equally, for the mentor, it's really important it's confidential, because I sometimes share things with my mentees that is just for their benefit, and I don't want to be shared outside of our mentoring relationship. But trust is absolutely key, and Trudy's saying the same.
Yeah, true. There's some chats here I'd want to just recognize.
We'll talk about pricing in a minute. I just want to say, Trudy says, I agree about the trust issue because I mistakenly chose my director who repeated all our conversations to my immediate manager. That is the total breach of, professional relationship. That is really, really bad. So thanks for sharing that, Trudy. And Mike says, and that's a very good question. I have very strong views on this. What is the pricing? How does it work? Well, in my books, and I feel very passionately about it, it's free. So for me, when I mentor people because I want to give the help back that I had when I was coming to the industry. And so, but not everyone agrees with me. Some people charge for it. But I personally think mentoring as a professional development tool from colleague to colleague or peer to peer, personally, I think that should be free. Paula, what do you think?
Honestly, I've never heard of anyone paying for mentoring. Every organization where I've ever worked where it was offered, it was always free. To me, if you're paying for it, it's probably like having a career coach. I mean, I can see where there could be very similar experiences if someone's coaching you or someone's mentoring you. But I've actually never heard of paying for mentoring. In fact, I had to read Micah's question twice, thinking, what does she mean by that?
I mean, there are some online platforms that I've found where people can buy mentoring time, and they seriously buy it, so they have to pay for that. I apologize for that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because to me that sort of goes against the trust thing. How can you trust someone that you just paid online to be your trusted mentor? It does seem that the trust issue also seems to go back to why you don't have your boss, or you don't have someone in the line of your boss, because it sounds like Trudy's example, it wasn't her boss, but it was her boss's boss. Yes. And so I think that goes exactly to the point you made earlier about offline relationships. We're at 12:34, so I'm going to say let's move on to, because we have two more pieces, and I want to make sure we...
Reverse mentoring, and I know that we had a good discussion about that. What is that? Mentoring at any age, reverse mentoring.
Sure, yeah, and that was a term I had heard, but honestly, before we talked, I did not understand quite what it was, and now I do. And it's basically, traditionally mentoring's been more about an older, more experienced person guiding a younger, less experienced person, but reverse mentoring is sort of a new trend, and it's becoming popular, and that would be a young person mentoring an older person in an area where they have a lot more knowledge. For example, in a small company, a graduate who knows about cybersecurity might mentor the CEO, or a young digital marketing manager might mentor a senior marketing professional in the company, because they need to understand things that they have no direct experience of. And so this shift is becoming so popular because it's good for an organization for everyone to learn from each other. And with 5 different generations in the workforce at the moment, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for this. And I think it does bridge some gaps for the workforce. So it's meant to help build a cohesive culture, and I think it can do that for sure. And it helps people appreciate each other. So it's not just like, oh, all those young folks, all of those old folks kind of thing. And it helps cultivate relationships, which can help like career path growth, but also in just very specific skill sets. Often it involves technology, I have to say, not always, but I think that's a pretty common area where the younger generation knows more than the older generation, just by definition of how we've been raised and what we've been exposed to in life. So it can make a more level playing field. And I would just want to add that don't think you're ever too young to mentor, because rather than thinking about your expertise, and think about who could benefit from it, regardless of age. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's always something that each person can give to the relationship. It might not be the same thing, but there's always something that can be gained. And I can say from personal experience, from having many 20-year-old nieces and nephews, and seeing, interacting with people who are trying to get into the career field, it can be very valuable. There's definitely times where I think, oh, I need to ask someone younger than me this question. They'll know it in seconds. I better text my niece right now. And I have a niece who's a marketing, she does social media marketing in New York City. So she's someone I ask questions of often. So I think that's what reverse mentoring is. And I think we will see more and more of it. I'd like to ask if, looks like Valerie had put in a question here, but while we're reading that question, does anyone else on the call have experience with reverse mentoring personally or in their organization? And if so, please feel free to unmute yourself and share. While we're doing that, let's just take a moment, Ruth, to read what Valerie's written and address that.
Yeah, she raises a good point. If you're self-employed, there's a slightly different dilemma, as you may feel that your best potential mentors are also your competitors. Trust and professionalism come into this in a big way. So that's where being in a professional association can help. Ethical principles are transparent. Yeah. And I mean, Valerie and I, we're both mentoring as part of the Career Development Institute here in the UK. And yeah, I mean, we've both mentored people who, in some respects, you could say are probably our competitors. But so it's very much about the agreement that you find between you and the mentee, and I always come from this point of view that, especially in the careers field, I always feel like, there's so much work and there's so much collaboration and openness, let's just be clear and open about it, and where the boundaries to make sure that, you can be open and you don't really cross those boundaries. But there's a lot of trust in that, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that boundaries, I'm going to just add something to that maybe while you read the next chat comment, Ruth. I think it brings up boundaries are important no matter what type of mentoring relationship it is. And conflicts of interest have to be considered, and confidentiality. But again, these are things you agree upon at the beginning. And I think that is a unique issue when you're self-employed. That goes back to the strategy. Maybe you purposely don't ask someone who's in your same city or in your same country. Maybe you purposely ask someone who is some distance away, so that you don't pick someone who could maybe have a conflict of interest. And let's face it, it hasn't happened to me, but I know colleagues who have had their ideas stolen and words off the websites plagiarized and things like that. So that is, I think if that's someone's concern, I think it's a reasonable concern, but I think it just has to be addressed up front.
And I think that's obviously the advantage if you're in a formal mentoring relationship, because there's always an organizer, and and it happens sometimes mentoring doesn't work out, and you can go back to the coordinator, or if you have a reason to complain, you obviously try and work that out with the mentor or mentee, but then there's always the last resort of the coordinator, and there are certain penalties involved. I mean, Gail is saying that she's delivers a mentoring program for startups, and when she matches, the mentors and the mentees, they sign the agreement for confidentiality, and that they cannot use the content from the relationship in the mentor's business. I mean, that's a really good way to do it. So making sure that, people cannot steal, because it's a lot of trust. And what do you do if someone breaches that trust? At least, if you have a formal agreement in place, then you have a lot more protection. Let's just also look at, Olayinka. She had a few good questions. So what are the advantages of formalizing the relationship? Personally, I mean, I've been involved in both quite a bit, informal and formal. And I think for me, the advantage of formalizing it is there are clear boundaries, we sign a contract, and there's a certain commitment in terms of expectations. Let's say I want you to mentor me for 6 months, and we'll have a 1-hour conversation once a month, and you're bound by that, and it makes it, to me, much clearer, but there's also stronger commitment. And personally, I actually have learned that for me, the formalized version works better. Somehow there's something in me that when I have a longer term engagement with someone and we have put things in writing and there's certain expectation, personally, I just seem to respond a little bit differently. Maybe I take it more seriously, I don't know, but it's certainly something that I enjoy. And what if you have people you reach out to for advice on career-related matters? Is there an additional benefit of designating a particular person as your mentor? I mean, if you have a mentor, that doesn't mean you can't engage with other people and ask them for advice. And actually, often part of the mentoring is your mentor will say to you, okay, why don't you speak to so-and-so and so-and-so and find out, and report back what you found. But I think having that designated person, because it is the person gives you 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 12 months of support, challenge, goodwill, and so you develop that relationship and people get to know you so well, and that is really magic, because that's the power of mentoring in my view, that they really are your champion. They will challenge you and you can tell them how challenging you want them to be. But I think having that one person who really gets to know you, can give you feedback, for me, that is the beauty of the mentoring. So that's why I think that can go deeper with one person than having 5 conversations with 5 different people for 20 minutes. I mean, that's just my experience. Right. What do you think, Paula?
I agree with everything that you said, and I'm noticing that we're running low on time left. Yeah. So I just want to make sure we get to the last number 5, because it's all about confidence, and number 5 is how does mentoring, help your confidence. So we can stay on and answer questions. I think you've done a great job of answering everything, and it looks like Trudy and Gail are having sort of a conversation, which is great, within our conversation. And so if it looks like Trudy is looking for details of Gail's Entrepreneurial Hub mentoring. So maybe you can share that in the chat box if that's okay. And I think you just addressed this. Is it okay to have more than one mentor? I think you just addressed that, correct? That it's okay to have more than one. But I would be
think about your time commitment as well. You're probably busy with just one mentor, and then it can get in the way. But I know people who've got several, and they just keep spinning and and move forward really fast. Let me just say a few things about the confidence building of mentoring, because that's really why we're running this series. How can we use mentoring, or why does mentoring help us with confidence? And I think there are a few things. First of all, having that unwavering support. That dedication and that goodwill from someone with a lot of experience, having that confidential space and finding new ways to think and approach things. I mean, for me, that is so confidence building. And having that confidant, the champion, there's someone on your side. And you can really feel that when you work with someone who's got your best interest at heart. That feels really, really special. And because it's a longer term commitment, I mean, often it's 4 sessions, 6 sessions, could be 12 sessions, you really get to know each other pretty well. And hearing your mentor's perspective, and also because they got to get to know you, their feedback, it really means something. You know, they're often really good at spotting talent and potential and pushing you or nudging you to do things that you might not have dared to do or hadn't had the confidence to do before the mentoring. I think these are all incredible benefits from mentoring. You know, having that person's belief in you, I think that is absolutely priceless. You know, having that trust. So in many ways, you know, I think Paul and I, we had long conversations about mentoring, and we just felt we can't recommend enough getting stuck in mentoring, whether that's as a mentee or a mentor or both, because we learn so much, you know, and we can give so much to other people too. And it's a method that's been around for thousands of years, and we just know the process works.
Great. Well, thanks, Ruth. It's 12:46, so we'll
Wow.
understand if people have to. I know, it's amazing how time flies. We're definitely going to stay on the call and open it up. Anyone's welcome to make comments, add any insights, but we also understand if people have to go, like Gail had just commented that she has a client call to prep for or call to prep for. So I would open it up at this point to anyone who has any comments. And in the meantime, I just want to say thanks for attending today and sharing your ideas. We hope this was helpful, and you will get a follow-up email that has a copy of the recording and a survey. If you are willing to give us some feedback, we'd love that. And then just finally to mention that there is a third episode, so to speak, of this series, and that is next Friday. It will be noon East Standard Time, but because we have daylight savings in the US, it will be 4 p.m. in the UK instead of 5 p.m. Right, wow. Ruth? That's yes. So slight difference for the UK folks, but on the East Coast, it should be noon again.
And it's the same, Micah, for you in Spain, it will be a different time too. So we need to all check those arrangements, because otherwise we'll be arriving an hour late, and that would be terrible. So thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, it looks like Valerie just added something. And yes, Trudy, sorry that your sound never worked to allow you to talk, but we did get your chat, so we appreciate your input as well. Valerie, just as a final question about sort of the difference between peer mentoring and buddying, you know, so I think, in my opinion, they could be similar, but sometimes when I've seen buddy systems, it might be a shorter term, like maybe you're just a buddy for the day for someone on their first day on the job. Whereas to me, peer mentoring would be, and mentoring would be maybe a longer term commitment. There might be other differences. I think they're pretty similar though, in reality. What do you think, Ruth?
It's interesting, isn't it, peer-to-peer mentoring? Because I think you can argue, when I hear it, I think of it's people with, you know, similar levels of experience. I mean, Paul and I, you can argue, we're peer mentors because, you know, we have similar length of experience in our field. You know, we're enthused by similar things. And buddying for me is, there's less intention behind it, I think. Peer mentoring, I would really look carefully, okay, who do I want to be peer mentor with? Buddying up is an easy, for me mentally, you know, that's an easy thing to do. I think you just, you know, in a workshop, or you want to discuss something and you just buddy up for a very specific little piece of work, or for a day's conference, or but that's, I need to give that more thought. That's a really good question.
That is a good question. Yeah, I could see buddying up and peer mentoring helpful in terms of like sharing about, at least in our career field, sharing rates, you know, what you're charging clients, and maybe what opportunities and trends you're seeing coming through. So that could be applied to any field where you're in the same field. So I think there are some good, I haven't really seen too many formal mentoring programs that are peer mentoring. It's usually, like, as mentioned in the call, alumni, new student, more seasoned person, less seasoned person. But I do think, I know personally, as I mentioned earlier, I haven't been in any formal mentoring program myself, but I feel like I have a ton of peer mentors, and I'm always having conversations with different peers about different things. There's people on the call right now who I've asked advice about writing a book, or setting rates, or what conferences are good to go to. So I think, but it's all been quite informal, very helpful and very beneficial, but not so formal. Looks like we got another comment or question here, Ruth. How do you advise one make the most of an appointed mentor within a mentoring program, even though the mentee struggles to identify the benefits of the relationship? For example, the mentor doesn't have knowledge or on mentee's area of expertise, or the mentee doesn't have a particular issue to solve. That is interesting. I think most of the mentoring programs that I've witnessed or implemented, usually that doesn't happen, or it's not supposed to, because the whole point is designed to match people up, whether it's an interest or an experience or so I think that would be tough, honestly, if you were matched with a mentor and you didn't, it wasn't so quite obvious why you were matched with that person. So I think that one, I might look into the program itself and sort of figure out how did that happen. I wouldn't complain about it, but I would at least do some research to find out, because that doesn't really sound like a normal thing that happens in a formal mentoring program. But beyond that, I would just try to look at the positive and look at what can you learn from this person. So they don't have your industry experience, or they didn't go to your college, or whatever the commonality you thought you were going to get. But I'm sure there's something that you both can share with each other, knowledge, expertise, experience. So I would really try to find out, and I might just be blatantly honest with the mentor. Like, I'm not quite sure why they've matched us up, but let's try to figure out on our own what we can offer each other, and try to, you don't have to have a problem to solve, so to speak, but it does help if you have a focus. It's not just about getting to know someone new with no purpose.
Yes.
So what do you have to say about that, Ruth?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting opportunity to actually pluck up your courage and talk about the elephant in the room, because the mentor might just have exactly the same feeling. What am I supposed to do with this person? We're not really a good match for each other. And ideally, I think this should come from the mentor, but if you notice that as a mentee, it's your opportunity to find, okay, how can I bring this up without undermining someone? In certain cultures, depending on how an older person is seen or age is seen, it could not be the thing to do. But I think in terms of professional development opportunity, I would find a way to talk and say, are you gaining something, from this relationship? My concern is this, and it's a great opportunity to say these uncomfortable things and find a solution, because there's nothing worse than for a mentor and a mentee to be assigned to each other, and then it's just not working, and there's not enough to discuss, or the mentor hasn't been great at helping you identify what you can work on. I mean, that is really the mentor's role. But I would always start with addressing it within the relationship and see where you get with that. And only as a last resort go to the coordinator who set up the scheme, because I think it's an opportunity to resolve that for yourself. But it sounds like that the matching was not done very well. And I know from people, when I set up these schemes, the mentor-mentee matching is very time consuming, very demanding. And sometimes there's just not enough time to do it really well, but that never works out. I always say make time for it, because if you don't, then you have problems later on, and there's nothing worse than not being matched up with someone you really feel you can't help, because that's also frustrating for the mentor.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Ruth. Every program I've been involved in implementing, it's that's part of what's incumbent upon the organization or the person or the association, whoever's offering the mentoring. That's usually part of what they're selling as a benefit, is that you'll be matched with someone that makes sense. So I think it is incumbent upon the group that's offering it to make that happen. That said, of course, like you said, Ruth, sometimes there's not enough time, or there's just not, maybe, you've been asked to implement a mentoring program in way too short a time that's realistic, and you do the best you can. And even under the best of circumstances, as Ruth mentioned, sometimes you just don't click with someone.
Yeah.
And so, that could happen, but I would just say, take it as a learning experience, how do you handle that? And then you could use it in a future interview when someone asks you, tell me about a time when something didn't go exactly as you planned. And then you have a great answer for a future interview.
Yeah, I think, that sometimes people can look even ideal on paper, and in reality, they are just not getting on with you. That can happen. But I always think, it happens, no big deal, and just resolve it. But I can understand when you're the mentee, that can feel really uncomfortable, because ideally it should come from the mentor, and they should really spot it. But if they don't spot the incongruent backgrounds and relationships, then this is your chance as a mentee to be brave and find a way to bring it up. And a good mentor will listen. And if they don't listen or get offended, then I would question what kind of a mentor they are. Okay, we have a few resources.
Here's some resources that you had pulled together. And so I'm just flipping. Sorry?
And I've used them all, and they're all fantastic. And the Zachary, she's a fantastic mentor specialist in the US. David Clutterbuck is highly regarded in the UK, and then I've got something European. I didn't find anything for Asia, but if you have anything for Asia, do let us know. But these are some good starting points. Sadly, I couldn't find really good articles that are short and snappy, so it's bigger books, but they're all, if you're interested, I can't recommend them highly enough.
Excellent. And then I'm just going to end with our slide that has how to stay in touch with us. We'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'm not a huge Facebook person, but so please accept my advanced apologies if it takes me a long time to accept your invitation. But please follow us on Twitter, and definitely we're both on LinkedIn a lot. And thanks everyone again for being here today. We really appreciate it. It makes it more fun when everyone's conversing.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you also for staying with us till the very end, because we have we've had a full hour, but you could talk about mentoring all day long. So wish you very, very well. And if you have any questions, do get in touch. Thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend.
Yep, and have a good rest of your afternoon if you're on the East Coast, or evening, rest of the day, morning, wherever you are in the world. And please come back and join us next Friday. You can register as you did on this one at paulabrand.com. And thanks for all the feedback. We're getting some thank yous. Thank you, Louisa. And Sabira, thank you also. Sabira saying she needs to get a mentor now. Well, I was actually thinking that maybe I should join a formal mentoring program, but first I have to find one. So yeah, it's inspired me as well. Thanks to everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. We'll keep it within an hour. Thanks again for those who stayed on a little bit longer than we had expected. And please do stay in touch. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And Ruth, thanks to you for being an awesome co-host. See you next Friday. Okay, bye-bye.